Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our Sonlight Newbies workshop on socialization. I am Sunny. I'm Sonlight's Community Manager and a Sonlight mom of 2 children. And joining me today is one of your Sonlight mentors, Anne. Anne, welcome. Thank you for being here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your Sonlight journey?
Well, my Sonlight journey began in 2007 when I started with the pre-K program with my son. And now he's home on his break from his first semester of college. And I also have a daughter who's a junior in high school this year.
Well, perfect. Thank you so much for being here. I am going to warn you guys watching, I'm dealing with a cough right now. So if I mute myself immediately, that's why. And my voice is a little strained, but Anne can definitely jump in with anything if that happens. But we are going to be talking about socialization today. So that is definitely a homeschool hot topic. It's something that you are often questioned about when you start homeschooling, and it may be something that you have a lot of questions about as well. So if you do, make sure you drop those in the comments, and Anne and I will answer them for you. But let's start by defining what socialization is. I know that's something that people say, oh, I need to send my kids to school so they can get socialized. But what are we even talking about there, Anne?
Yeah, I think a definition of socialization is knowing how to function in society. A couple of points with that, just knowing common and social norms, being able to hold conversations with people across generations. And I know that it is definitely a common concern that people get a lot of questions about. And my background, I used to teach high school biology. And so I had, 6 different classes that were, how long were they? Actually, they were an hour and a half long. We had block scheduling. And I will tell you, according to our definition of socialization, we didn't do much of that in class. I mean, they were there to learn from me, and I imparted lots of science knowledge. And, there wasn't just a ton of interaction except on lab days, between the students. So socialization, being able to function in society, I think homeschooling is a great place to have that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know things like manners and being able to hold conversations, all of that, these are things that your kids often learn from your example. And so I think, yeah, like you said, in school, how often do we remember, those of us who went to school too, being told, be quiet, it's time to listen now. And we would get in trouble if we were talking during class. And so it was really those situations like lunch or recess, field trips, things like that, where you're actually getting to socialize. And when you're homeschooling your kids, they can still partake in all those opportunities as well with other kids. You said something too about being able to hold conversations across generations. And I think that's something too that people don't even think about. When your kids go to school, they're with classmates that are the same age all day, but that doesn't mean that they become effective communicators across generations, which realistically, that is more the communication you're going to have in your adult life. I know when I started working right out of college, I was the only one that was in my early 20s, and I have colleagues that were much older. And so that's something that I think it's important kids learn. So what are some ways, you mentioned that you can do that when you're homeschooling, but how much does homeschooling impact that? And are they really missing out? Do you have to worry? I mean, I know everybody kind of has that back of their mind, oh, my kids are going to be awkward if I homeschool them. What are some ways to prevent that or to make sure that they are developing those social skills?
Yeah, that's definitely a concern. And I'll give a personal story here. My daughter, who's a junior in high school, has been working a part-time job at Chick-fil-A for a little while. And so she works with a lot of other teenagers when she does work after school hours. And so a lot of them have asked her, oh, where do you go to school? And when she says she homeschools, they every single one of them has said, oh, I had no idea. Basically she's normal. And they had no idea she was educated in any sort of different way. So anyway, so how is it that they have these opportunities while homeschooling? Well, being I think one thing to point out is the interactions in a typical traditional school are more of, the adults are the authority and the children, are there to learn from them. Whereas at home, of course, you are an authority. But there's much more of a relationship kind of aspect between the adults in your home and the kids. And then if you do have multiple children, the kids are used to being with kids of other age groups. Another thing that happened one day, my son was out, we were out watching a baseball game at our local Dixie Youth baseball group, and we were there to watch someone play. Well, my son was taking a little break from watching that game, and there were some kids in an empty field that were just throwing around the ball and stuff like that, all different ages. And when he came back, he told me that he really saw a difference in how some of those kids treated the kids of different ages, not with much respect. And that's not to say that this is some sort of blanket thing that any kid that goes to public school is not going to learn to respect people. I'm not saying that at all. But he actually really did notice a difference in how the kids of different ages were treated. And growing up with our homeschool park days in our town, my kids were always used to being around kids of all different ages and doing all sorts of things. My son, one of his more recent birthdays, when he turned 18 a year or so ago, had a few of his closest friends out to a baseball game, and their ages were 17, and 15. So that's just one of the things they just learn. If age doesn't matter that much, you can be friends with whoever you want to, no matter what their age, and that's so easy to develop with homeschooling.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, because they're around, like you said, even within the same home, they're around their siblings way more than they would be. This is something, my kids are 5 years apart, and I have one daughter, one son. And so I've often wondered if they went to school and were away from each other all the time, would they even have much of a relationship because of that big age gap and doing different activities versus the fact that they are both home. They get to interact with each other a lot. And, I'm already seeing glimpses of their adult relationship where they get along really well. And, my daughter is the older one, so she's very protective of him, but, she definitely is much closer to him and less annoyed by him, I think, than if they were not spending that time together. And I love what you said too about your daughter at work. People all the time, say, what? You're homeschooled? And I know that's been my kids too. They're like, you're so normal. And that is definitely a negative stereotype that just does not hold water once you see these kids, as they mature and develop. And I have one who's naturally more extroverted than the other, but both of them are able to communicate quite well. And a lot of that comes from the fact that they are with their dad and me all the time too. My husband also works from home, so they get to hear us interact in our jobs. They get to hear us interact with each other. We are there teaching them. But they have more mature vocabularies and things, I feel like, because they have those conversations with us during the day that they wouldn't be otherwise. Let's talk about some ways, though, that homeschoolers, I know sometimes people freak out a little bit like, okay, I'm home all day with my kids. How do I make sure that they are getting that social interaction, especially if you have a very extroverted child? I know sometimes, the parents of those kids are, well, my child needs a lot of interaction. So how do I do that? So what are some ways to incorporate those social opportunities into your homeschool day?
Yeah, well, one of the things that you might not think about, especially when the kids are younger, when they're too young to stay at home by themselves, when you have to go run errands and do things, they come with you. And so they learn how to interact with all people, from going to the grocery store to whatever errands you have. They actually learn what it's like to go into the bank and do things and all that kind of thing. So they see a whole lot of examples of interactions, in a much wider variety of places than they would if they were in school, from 8 to 3 or whatever that may be. So just running errands and things like that are actually very helpful. And then and it continues to be helpful because my son, when he is home and he does go to the grocery store with me now, he can reach all those things on the top shelf that I never will be able to. So some of these benefits can just carry on for years and years and years. Another thing that you may not think about, take advantage of the homeschooling, the freedom of the schedule, and look for places to volunteer. we kind of had a unique opportunity. We have a state historic site in our town, and my kids became junior volunteers there. But I know there's lots of places around your community, like possibly like a humane society, caring for the animals, things like that. Lots of places to volunteer. And a lot of times around the holidays, a lot of people think about that, visiting people in nursing homes and assisted living and things like that. But those kind of things can be done year round to have good interactions between all different ages. But then, of course, what about making, socialization opportunities, people that you want to see and want to have in your life, all the time, not just visits here and there. Church, of course, is a good place. Being involved in a homeschool co-op, and we can go into more detail about that. Sports, extracurricular activities. My son was involved in the baseball group when he was younger, and when he aged out of it, we have a local homeschool sports league that he's been involved with. My daughter has done dance and gymnastics, and now that she's older, the homeschool volleyball team. So I live in a pretty small town too. So if we've got those things, I do hope that a lot of you have those things too. We've got 25,000 people in our town, and we have been able to find so many opportunities. So they're definitely out there.
Yeah, and I think if you're looking for those, oftentimes like searching, either asking your state homeschool organization or kind of Googling homeschool activities near me is a good place to start to see what they have. I know when we lived in a different state, there was a local Christian school that had a homeschool academy where you could come in and play sports with the school. You could come in and do like theatrical production. You got to do basically all the fun classes, not the academic classes, but you got to do all the fun classes with that class. You got to go on field trips with them, and so that was something really nice for me. I know I always stayed away from co-ops because I've always worked for homeschooling, and I did not have the time to commit to teaching anything myself or organizing anything. And so if you're in that situation where either you have a bunch of littles or maybe you work part-time or something, and you're just like, oh, I can't do a co-op because I have to teach, there are homeschool opportunities like that as well, where you can drop your kids off and somebody else is teaching them or taking them on these different activities. So that might be something to look for. You mentioned church too. I know our church has a youth group that my teen daughter absolutely loves. But then she also volunteers in the pre-K nursery on Sunday mornings every other week. And so that's another opportunity too, if that's part service, but then also, we're coming there for the second service. And so then she joins us in the second service after she gets done. And that we were talking about those intergenerational relationships. I know she has met people of all ages that volunteer in the nursery with her. And so that's been a great opportunity. We talked about sports and extracurriculars. Yes, there are great homeschool opportunities, but there's also like rec sports in your town or, things like that too. So I know all of the extracurricular activities my kids have done have been activities that have been open to kids that go to school, homeschool, like it's not just homeschooled kids. And so that's been kind of a neat opportunity. I think as they started hanging out with kids who went to school, they became more aware of all the freedom and the flexibility that they have in being homeschooled as well, which is good. Let's see, it looks like we've got some questions coming in. Our children's museum has a homeschool science experiments once a month that's coming in regularly. So that sounds super fun. Look for museums around you because oftentimes they do homeschool days too, where you can get free or reduced rate admission and meet other homeschoolers. And then Jana is saying that her kids helped with Upwards at church, the Upwards sports. So so even if you don't want to play the sports, you still have the opportunities to maybe coach the sports or help out with younger kids as well. You mentioned errands though, and I love that because even like little kids, right? You take them to the grocery store with you. And I think that was the first place that my kids ever heard me say like, please and thank you to somebody, or like when you're paying for something. And that is something that I don't know if it's just the schools around us, but when I go out to eat, a lot of the teens in our community do not have those basic manners. So I think if you even start with introducing yourself and please and thank you and things like that, that's something very easy to incorporate into your normal homeschool day. And then also neighbor kids. If you live in a neighborhood where there's other kids around, I know we have a ton of kids in our neighborhood. And if, especially when the weather is nice, they're just in the street all the time, which I actually hadn't seen since my own childhood till we moved to our current neighborhood. So I know not everybody has that, but yeah, when there's other kids around, send your kids out there and let them play and interact with other kids. But let's talk a little bit too about homeschool parents. We talked about the homeschool kids, but I know sometimes the parent gets a little burnt out because they're spending so much time, they don't have that adult interaction. So what or how should they prioritize their own socialization as well, and making sure that they have activities for themselves too?
Yes, I think that's really, really important because, as parents plus the homeschool aspect, we are serving, people all day long. So it is really important to make time for yourself. It is definitely something that you have to be intentional about because it's really easy to let the time slip by. And, you've got to be really intentional about it. One thing to keep in mind is that I call this double dipping. Let's say your kids are involved in activity already. Well, make that be an opportunity for you to be able to socialize too. So when, my daughter does gymnastics and I'm in the, parent room watching, you meet the other parents and things like that. When you go to meets or games or whatever the case may be, then you've got some folks that and you can go do dinner afterwards, things like that. So make it a point to meet the other adults that are also involved in activities that your kids are in. So that's some double dipping there. And just find opportunities when you can. I like to double dip in another way too, even if it is an activity for me. I try to just get the most bang for my buck. So when my husband and my son were out at Scouts every Monday evening, I would invite some moms and daughters over to my house. And so the kids would play and the moms, we would work out. So we got our exercise in for that day. And it was really super fun time. So I'm all in for double dipping. But sometimes you just need to do something by yourself too. And I totally get that. Especially, for me, especially when the kids were younger and just needy, young children are needy. My husband get home from work, I would just need to go be by myself. I would just say, here you go. Here's the leftovers. I'm going. I would just go walk around the store and window shop and just be by myself for a little bit. And that's totally okay too. And another thing besides just being all by yourself, you can, as a person, you get away from mom roles and things like that and go find a place to volunteer yourself. I mentioned that historic site locally. And when my kids got older, they became volunteers too. But I've been doing that for a really long time. And it's just a great place, just a great idea just to find a volunteer activity that gets you around other people that have common interests. I love history. Imagine I love history, when I get to read all these great Sonlight history books. So when I'm volunteering at the historic site, I get to share history with other people and be around other people that are interested in history too. So there are just so many opportunities out there that you just have to kind of go seek them out and find the time to do that.
Yeah, that's so true. And I love what you said both about the social and then also like mom time, right? For yourself too. I think both of those are super important. I have a tendency to be more of an introvert. And so oftentimes I need to kind of step away and do my own thing. And so I try to make time every day for something, even if it's 5 to 10 minutes of time to either read my own book, do my Bible study, work out, something like that to kind of get my head on straight. That way I'm ready to conquer the day and whatever's coming at me. But then also social activities with other women. I know I joined women's Bible study at my church, but I went specifically at night when there was not childcare because I did not want to be around other people's kids after being around my own kids all day, who I love and I'm super close to. I needed just adult time. And so our church had one during the day with childcare if you had younger kids that you wanted to bring, but they also had a women's Bible study at night where no childcare was provided. So I would leave the kids with my husband, and then I would go spend time with these other women and get that social interaction. And then we would go to dinner like once a month. And so I started doing that several years ago. And that, really, I've met many of my closest friends that way. But we try to go to dinner once a month or do something when it's just us, no kids, or anybody else around. And so that gives me that time for that adult interaction. But I do have to say, as your kids get older too, now that my daughter's a teenager, I really do enjoy hanging out with my kids and socializing with them too. And I'm sure now that your kids are older, you're kind of in that same age group as well. When the kids are little, they need so much, right? But as they get older, they become more independent. And if you've built this relationship with them homeschooling, it really is fun to talk to your older kids and hang out with them.
Yes. Oh, I agree so much. A lot of people have asked me this year with my son going off to college, how did I do? And I would tell them I really did amazingly well, partly because I did hear from him more than I actually thought I would, because he would just call me up any random day to tell me what he was learning in his classes. And I just thought that was so cool. So we really kept in touch really well. And you're right. Now, I mentioned when the kids were much younger, I would just have to get out of the house and just be alone. It's totally not like that anymore. It's so fun to see the relationships grow as you become more of a mentor, to them, and less of a, teacher kind of thing, as they get more independent in their school too. So it's super fun. Now that he's home from school on the break, we're just really enjoying the time together, just visiting.
Well, and I love what you said there too, because I feel like all of our mentors who have grown children, they all say like, oh, it's so fun when they come back and we have this good relationship and we talk often. And so that's a big motivator for me, with kids still at home that I'm homeschooling, is, I hope when they grow up, we still have this close bond and this close relationship. And I think, you are able to build that so much better just because you're there with them all day, whether you're teaching them or they're having a crisis of their own and you're counseling them or whatever it is. So that is a great point. Now, I know sometimes, you might have hesitations when you start homeschooling, but I think once you get into it, you do start to see those benefits and you realize, oh no, your kids are totally fine. But it's the outsiders, right? I know even after homeschooling more than a decade, I still get comments sometimes like, well, aren't you worried about your kids, not being in school, or, oh, you're going to send them to high school, right? Like, those types of things. And there's all these incorrect perceptions, I guess, about where socialization occurs and all of that. So how would you advise people that maybe are dealing with those comments from, maybe their family members or close friends? What can they do to kind of justify their decision making and know that it's going to be okay?
Right. I think what you do say ends up having something to do, with the relationship you have with the person. And if it's someone really close, you can really, tell them your reasons and whatnot. If it's more of an acquaintance, you could just say something short and sweet. I would say acknowledge their concern, because I think the only reason people ask that is because they really truly are concerned, that your kid doesn't turn out strange or awkward or unable to function in society. They're obviously concerned. So if it's more of an acquaintance, I would acknowledge, their concern. Thank you for your concern, but you could give as much or as little information as you want, that they're doing fine. That's all you really have to say. Because typically, if anybody spends any time around your kids, they'll know that they are fine. I think if it is a closer person to you, then it's completely okay to go into some of the details and explain, how this is okay. This is something that I will never forget. This was years and years and years ago, but I was working out at the gym. And my kids were real little, and they were in the gym childcare. And one of my I mentioned I taught biology. I think I mentioned that. Okay, so one of my former students came in, and he knew that I had, little kids and everything. And he asked me about something about, if they went to, the school district they used to teach at, or something like that. And I said, no, I'm homeschooling. And he looked at me and he just said, well, but then how are they going to experience bullying? He said that. I was shocked. I said, well, I really hope they don't experience that. Anyway, you just never know. You really never know what you're going to hear.
Well, I think that's a good point too, that not all socialization at school is socialization you want your kids exposed to, right? Like things like bullying. I actually remember that when my kids were a little bit younger, and I don't remember where we were, but my daughter was just so incredibly confident. And somebody commented on it and they were like, wow, how is she so confident? And I was like, I really think it's because she hasn't been bullied. She hasn't been in a school situation where she was made fun of for enjoying learning or, for being herself. And so she doesn't have those hangups. Now that she's a little older, she of course deals with some insecurities. But overall, when I look at myself at that age, who was so worried about where I fit on the social ladder in my school, and there's so many things that she has avoided by not being in those situations. Yeah, I thank God. I'm like, oh my goodness, my kids have avoided any of that. They never have felt like they weren't smart enough, right? Because it's not like they were in a classroom where they had other students the same age, around them that they were trying to match pace with their learning or anything like that. Like there's so many positive benefits to just letting them learn in an environment where they're encouraged to learn at their pace. And they avoid bullying and things like that. And I know really as my kids have gotten older, when people are like, oh, aren't you worried about them? I'm like, have you met them? Like, come talk to them and you will realize like there's nothing to worry about. I think the first few years I homeschooled, I was nervous about that, right? Everybody thinks of homeschooling kids as being the weird kid, but there's also weird kids that come out of public school too, right? Like, so now I'm just like, well, kids are only going to be as weird as their parents are. So unless you think I'm weird.
Right. If you think about it, if your kid is shy, it's not because they're homeschooled. There are plenty of shy kids in public school too. They'll have their own, personality leanings, and that's totally normal.
Yeah.
We went out to eat one time when my kids were little, talking about random people just talking about, oh, what about socialization? Then you come into these situations, like you said, someone said your daughter was confident, and I noticed that. We were on a trip and we were going out to eat at a restaurant, and my kids were, talking to the waiter and ordering their food, and the waiter commented to us about how, I don't know what the word is. Well mannered, maybe some sort of confidence type of thing too. I don't know. I personally remember when I was young, I was scared to death of going up to the counter and ordering anything, and I just did not want to do that. But I think that's part of all that errand running, that we had done. They just were comfortable talking to other people and out in those different kinds of settings.
Yeah, well, and I think, so my son is our shyer of the two. Like you said, there's shy kids in school, there's shy kids out of school. I was definitely very shy. And I remember being scared to death to talk to anybody. And that was one of the first things he did, was order for himself at a restaurant, and the first few times he was hesitant, but we said, nope, here's how you do it. You say, I would like this, please. And thank you, and then, from an early age, he was able to place his own order and just do all of those things. So even little skills like that, you don't really think about, your kids pick that up from watching your example. And so, I think it's so easy to just seamlessly, incorporate it into your life when you're already homeschooling. I know too, like I notice when we, even like if we go somewhere where you can learn something, right? Like a historical site or a museum, because I'm used to teaching the kids, it's like, oh, remember when we read that in this book? And you're able to tie things in. And I think if you've homeschooled for really any period of time, what your kids know, what they learn. And it's very easy to just naturally incorporate those things into your day-to-day. So so really, I know we say don't worry about it, but really don't worry about it, because you will find, that very quickly your kids are getting the social interaction they need. Now, what about in the case, though, I wanted to lightly touch on it because I've seen questions about this in the groups where the parent is the introvert, They're tired. They don't want to go do a bunch of things, but they have maybe 1 or 2 children that are very extroverted, right? And they're like, oh my goodness, I have to take this child out to be around other people, but I'm exhausted. What advice would you give in those situations, to make sure that they're giving their child what they need, but also as the mom, they're not just
Right. I would say in that case, look around your community for those things, art lessons or, music lessons, things that other people, it gives them opportunity to be in a group doing other things and someone else is teaching it and not you. And that could be a weekly thing. Which would be great to have that built in, time where you do just drop them off and things like that. And as they get older, well, honestly, it just gets easier as they get older because they may have church youth activities and lots of things like that where you do not have to participate. So if you're in the thick of it when they're little and honestly, there really aren't, too many opportunities for drop off things when they're too little. You just know that it is just for a short time period. But look into sports, and that's a great way to. I've loved having to be able to check off that PE box, on the transcript because they're involved in sports. I don't have to come up with that myself. I actually tried one time. A neighbor and I thought, oh, let's do PE and be regular routine about it. And maybe we got together twice, so having something that really is scheduled for you by other people with the groups like that. I think the sports teams are just great. The only downside to the sports teams when the kids are little, oftentimes they're not, really drop off type of situations. You really need to be at the practice and things like that. But it still would give you some time. Maybe you could just sit in the car while they're at practice. So you're available.
Your book. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Excuse me. No, that's a great point. Yeah, is that as they get older, with all things, it gets easier. I know for me, I found both of my kids, like kind of that kindergarten through second grade was the hardest for everything, right? The homeschooling piece, the activities and extracurriculars, there's not as much for younger kids. But dance, gymnastics, rec sports, anything like that usually starts in those early elementary years. So if you find your child is needing more and you need a little bit of a break, like you said, go and sit in the car or bring your coffee and your book. I know that my book is always my signal that I'm not wanting to talk to anybody. So if I have my book out and I'm reading, that just means I just need to kind of decompress on my own. And then when I put my book away, then I'm ready for those social things. And then, like we said, making time, for whatever it is that you like to do on your own too. I think that is huge. Exercise, Bible study, reading your own book, finding whatever that avenue is for yourself, I think is great. Before we close down, is there anything else you'd like to add that we didn't cover today?
That's a good question. I really can't think of anything unless there's any are there any other questions that people have popped up?
Yeah, no new ones. I looked at it. So if you're watching the replay later and you have some though, definitely put them in here because we would love to answer those later. Thank you for bearing with me and my sneezing, coughing, all of that today. I've been trying to talk as much as I can. Also, we do have some exciting events and things coming up in the upcoming weeks as well. So the first thing, we are actually moving to a new app. So if you are watching this live in the app, we actually found an app with better features and more of the things that everybody has mentioned they want, but we are going to keep the same groups and things that we have in the current app. So if you have any app suggestions, definitely let us know. But that new app is going to be available starting next week. So keep your eyes out. You'll get an email about it. We'll have you all set up where all you'll have to do is download the new app, but your profile that you already have in the existing app will be there and ready for you. So we're excited. We think it's going to just be even better than what we've had this year in the app. So that is coming next week. Keep your eyes out, like I said, in your email for the information to move over there. Also, we have a homeschool helps and hacks coming up on January 19th, and that is our New Year Fresh Start. So whether you are starting a new school year right now, or maybe you're in the middle of it and you're having a really hard time getting back in the swing of things after the holidays. We're going to give you some tips and tricks in there to help you out and make this school year a lot easier and getting back in the swing of things. I know sometimes it's really hard in January. Then also, at the end of January is School Choice Week. So we're going to celebrate the choice to homeschool all week long. And we are actually doing an event January 24th through the 26th. And this is going to be Homeschooling with Sonlight, your guide to getting started. So if you have friends that are maybe curious about homeschooling, but they don't think they can do it for one reason or the other, we are going to do on January 24th, 25th, and 26th at 7 p.m. in the evening, an event that takes you from maybe don't think you can homeschool, maybe you've considered it, all the way up to, how do you actually get started? So please invite your friends that are in that position, or maybe they've seen what you're doing this year and they're interested. That's going to be January 24th, 25th, 26th at 7 p.m. There will be one session each time, and those we will be answering questions in there as well. So we would love to have some new people join us there that you may know that are interested in that. And thank you so much for being here with me today. And speaking about socialization, we also had Jana in the chat. So Jana, thank you for that. And again, if you guys have any questions or comments in the replay, we would love to answer those. And we're still going to be answering all your questions. So thank you so much, ladies.